Ranjit Singh Mann gave everyone, including the Akali Dal Badal, a jolt by winning the by-polls from Singrur, and at the expense of the Aam Aadmi Party just months after it came to power in Punjab with a good majority. Mann has followed radical politics, speaking out against the Constitution of India, and hence his win has raised eyebrows across the political spectrum. Why did this happen? What does it mean? How will it impact Punjab and indeed India? More so, as while the BJP seems to be on the ascendant, the opposition parties are fractured and divided in other parts of India. In Maharashtra, the government is fighting to survive. In Uttar Pradesh, two crucial by-elections in Rampur and Azamgarh were won by the BJP despite being Samajwadi Party strongholds. In Tripura, the Congress won only one seat of four, and the left did not figure in its former bastion. Will the opposition be able to come together for an effective performance in the general elections in 2024, or will it remain a house divided? So welcome to this edition of Off Limits. Our guest today is Naresh Gujral from the Akali Dal. He is well known, has been in politics for a long time, and we hear from him as a spokesperson quite often. So Mr. Gujral, welcome to Off Limits. And actually, it's very opportune that we're meeting you now and having this conversation because Simranjit Singh Mann has won the by-polls from Sangrur. Now, that was not expected, was it?
Well, it wasn't expected, but it's very unfortunate that a sensitive border state like Punjab, the public mood is moving more towards militancy, more towards it's getting radicalized. People are disappointed, so they're hanging on to any kind of hope. You saw what happened exactly 4 months ago when AAP romped home with 92 seats. And within 4 months, the honeymoon is over. But what is not good is that a person who does not believe in the Constitution of India, who openly says, talks of Khalistan, a person like him can be elected. Now, that is a very dangerous trend. And I think it is linked to the economic situation of Punjab. It is linked to the fact that the youth have lost hope. There are no jobs there. The economy is in total doldrums. And successive governments have failed to address this issue. Plus, the law and order situation is deteriorating a lot. Now, I cannot blame the present government alone. It's a legacy issue because of these gangs which came up, which are a byproduct of the drugs that invaded Punjab in early 2000. From then on, these drugs and gangs have flourished there. So it's a very complex issue. And I think the central government will have to extend help to Punjab. Law and order needs to be tightened. There has to be more, not the tutu meme, but there has to be cooperation between the central agencies and the state agencies. Otherwise, unfortunately, we are going back to the 80s.
So it's very interesting, the people had reposed faith in the Akali Dal, which was seen as something closer to Punjab's aspirations. It had created that whole feeling, and then, successive reasons, one of them being rank corruption maybe, which really brought in the arc. And now you feel that it's a downward trend, is it? This by-poll is indicating something else.
Please understand that there are splinter groups of Akali Dal.
Yeah.
Mr. Badal represents the moderate section of the Akalis, and they were accepted as the mainstream party by the people of Punjab from 2000, or I would say post 99.
Right.
Unfortunately, there are factions who were I would say, praising people like Bhindranwala, people who openly talked of Khalistan, people who talked of militancy. Unfortunately, that faction in the Akali Dal is now becoming stronger. This doesn't, it's not a good sign for Punjab. And that is what worries me.
And when you say the center should help, then obviously you're also allotting some blame there because of the kind of treatment that Punjab has gone and even got, and even during the farmer struggle, the whole thing of trying to make it a Khalistan movement or throwing those allegations. Do you think that has contributed to
You
this?
see, I'll tell you why I blame the center.
Ji.
The Punjab remains an agrarian society. Punjab needs to industrialize. Unfortunately, from the time of Mr. Vajpayee, we gave tax concessions to our neighboring states, whether it was Himachal, whether it was Uttaranchal, whether it was Jammu and Kashmir. They all got, if industry came there, they got 100% tax-free status. We were also demanding it for Punjab, especially the border districts. But the center never gave it to us. As a result, many of our industrialists moved away from Punjab and went to these states. Now, even today, and I've raised it in Parliament many times, we must get tax-free status for Punjab, especially the sensitive border districts. Nobody wants to set up industry there. And that is where the unemployment rate amongst the youth is the highest. Okay. Now, the only option left for Punjabi youth is to go abroad, what are known as the kabutars. Yeah. They buy a ticket to a third country, and from there they try to escape somehow to one of the Western countries, illegally, of course. Yeah. Now, why is this happening? Because no new job opportunities are coming up. Agriculture cannot give them. Agriculture, as you know, has been modernized, is getting mechanized. So obviously, and land holdings have shrunk. So obviously, there are no jobs. Now, how do you create jobs? No recruitment in the army for the last 2.5 years. That's a major grouse amongst the youth in Punjab. Agniveer has also become a bit of a problem. Absolutely, right? Absolutely. Yeah. Plus, no, I'm just telling you which were the avenues for jobs. Army was one avenue which closed down. No industry came. COVID hit us all, including Punjab. Revenues have shrunk. So there is, it's like I would say, youth is this hopelessness, sense of hopelessness. And when that happens, then desperation sets in. And that is where you see even the new rap songs and all, which are becoming so popular. They're talking of revolution. They're talking of taking up arms. Now, these things are all the responsible factors for taking Punjab towards the Mann factor. Now, as I said earlier, a gentleman who openly says that he does not believe in the Constitution of India today is able to defeat AAP, which came to power with a thumping majority just 3 months back. That goes to show the prevalent mood of the youth in Punjab, which is not good for the country and for Punjab. And it also goes to show how rapidly it's going down, right? Absolutely, absolutely. And this is something which is a cause for worry. Pakistan is always looking right for at the door, yes. Like this. They will try to play mischief. And this is exactly what happened, if you recall, in the 80s and 90s. Yes. When Punjab went through a horrible period, almost 50,000 lives were lost. And I do hope that we are not walking down the same path. So that's where center has to step in. Central agencies have to have a working relationship with the AAP government there, and at the same time provide succor to the Punjabis there by giving Punjab tax-free status, and also the issue of water sharing. It's a very sensitive issue. Now, from time to time, they say, no, you have to share waters with Haryana. The fact is, where is the water? Punjab, as it is short of water. So that issue has to be resolved amicably between the two governments. Chandigarh, which is an outstanding issue. Chandigarh has to come to Punjab. Two prime ministers gave an assurance on the floor of the house, and yet nothing happens. Now, all these, when things are bad, then all these issues come to the surface. And that is what is provoking the youth in Punjab today. And it's so crazy, while you were speaking, I mean, these issues of water sharing with Haryana, the issue of Chandigarh,
the issue of drugs and arms. This is something we've been listening to for years, I mean, decades literally. When it was smaller, then it became bigger. Even during the Khalistan movement in the 80s, drugs was a big issue. Easy supply of arms was a big issue. Why is it that no successive government has been able to or shown the will to deal with these issues?
Only for political purposes and vote bank politics. Sometimes you have to rise above that in the national interest. Sometimes you have to even sacrifice your government if required. But unfortunately, the way politics is being played in this country today, everything is short term, everything is vote bank politics, and it is all over the country.
Yeah.
And the era of the statesmen who thought beyond immediate gains, I'm afraid that's over. And that's very sad for this country.
Yeah, that's very problematic. You know, one of the reasons also is that you find that the opposition parties seem to be sort of fighting a little bit for themselves. AAP has won this time, it can lose the next time. Akalis are doing their own thing. Akalis themselves are split. In the rest of the country, as the bypolls have shown, the opposition is, while talking of democracy and talking of constitution and talking of all kinds of lofty ideals, just don't seem to be able to get their act together either in the states or with each other. I mean, this is probably, you were around in the National Front and the United Front governments, and you had some kind of a coalition that did emerge. But now these coalitions just don't seem to be happening.
Seema, if you look at the national scene, the regional parties have become stronger. Look at it from south, whether it's Tamil Nadu, whether it's Andhra, whether it's Telangana, whether it's even Kerala. Today, I would call CPI, CPM a regional party because their influence is limited to just 2 states. Similarly, Maharashtra, despite the problems which are going on, so Samajwadi Party is strong in its own state. Regional parties have become stronger, but unfortunately, they do not act together. I would say, most of these regional parties, and the Prime Minister is right there, are family-oriented parties. And when you are a family-oriented parties, then egos and ambition comes first and not the national interest. And unfortunately, that is what is happening today, that they cannot rise above their own egos. They're victims of their ego, they're victims of their ambition, and they divide the vote. So with just 37-38% vote share, BJP gets absolute majority in parliament. Now, your next question, I know, would be, can they get together? When you have to get together, there has to be a glue which is able to stick them together. Yeah. Again, as I said, today, where are the statesmen in this country who can play that role? A role that used to be played by people like Hari Krishan Singh Surjit, by people like Biju Patnaik. They were tall people. There were other such. My father was one of them. I remember the first meeting that took place of the opposition leaders was at our house. Mr. Chandrasekhar was there. Yes. Now, who is there except Mr. Sharad Pawar, who people look up to? But other than that, there is nobody in the country who can make them sit, even when they sit across the table, they are always looking at their personal interest. And as I said earlier, it's a very sad thing that not only are they victims of their own ego and ambition, they're also victims of the agencies, be it income tax, be it enforcement. And that has to do with the fact that most of these regional parties or regional leaders have too many skeletons in their cupboard. They have all made one mistake of mixing party funds with private funds. So the end result is that enforcement department can have a field day and the center just has to show them the rule book and they fall in line. If you look at the vote share, BJP vote share does not exceed even 40%. Yet look at the majority that they have. And this will continue. I am sorry to tell you that Mr. Modi will come back with as much, uh, as many seats in the next election, the way the opposition is splintered and the way they divide the vote. You have seen now in Azamgarh, SP lost by some 7,000 votes, but BSP got 2.5 lakh votes. Now you keep dividing the vote, obviously the ruling party will benefit. It used to happen earlier also during the Congress regime, when the opposition couldn't put its act together and Congress used to benefit. So today, BJP is the beneficiary of divided vote.
Yes, actually, very well said. You know, there is one, of course, this that they are not being able to come out, but you talked about UP. What is very interesting is you have the Samajwadi Party, which is contesting two very important elections, important because of the circumstances and the environment. And I think, as far as I know, Akhilesh Yadav didn't even go to campaign for those candidates. So and should have known that you're up against a fighting machinery and should have watched the vote, watched the booths, made sure that the organization stood up to the task. This is another major problem one is seeing, you know, that you do not have leaders now, even individuals, who are able to fight in their own states, except some, of course. But Akhilesh Yadav doesn't. Yeah.
This is the difference between BJP and the other parties.
Yeah,
BJP takes
absolutely.
even a small election in a small town very seriously. They plan, they campaign, their workers go all out, whether it's a municipal election, whether it's a panchayat election, where our so-called leaders in different states, unfortunately, more so in summer, love their air conditioners. Yeah. So you can't fight elections with a machine like BJP.
Yes.
And take elections casually or to take them for granted.
Yes, absolutely. Even if you're just interested in straight politics, you expect a better fight, which takes me to Maharashtra. We can't talk about the opposition politics and current politics without talking about what's happening in Maharashtra. The drama continues. You have a whole bunch of MLAs sitting in a hotel or wherever they're sitting in Guwahati. You have Uddhav Thackeray here. You had the BJP breathing down their neck. You have the, Sharad Pawar in full motion. What do you make of this, and what kind of impact is this going to have on the opposition?
Again, as I said, most of these parties are family parties. They sometimes lose touch with reality. Sometimes the leaders surround themselves with sycophants and yes men and lose touch with their own party. And I think to a large extent, I would blame the ruling party in Maharashtra. How could it be that 80% of your MLAs were dissatisfied?
And you did
of your MLAs were not in sync with what you were doing, and you had no inkling of it. That goes to show lack of leadership. Now, I hate to say so, but the first generation of the leaders who made these parties, whether it was Balasaheb, whether it was Mulayam Singh Yadav, whether it was Karunanidhi, all these, YSR, all of them, they always had their ear very close to the ground. The inheritors sometimes lose that, like in businesses. The inheritors are not that committed or not that close to the ground and are surrounded more by yes men. And that leads to crises like this.
Yeah, that's so well put. I mean, you can even say that about the Congress now, right? Though it's a national party.
It's the same story. They're inheritors.
Yes.
They're not the creators. But Mrs. Gandhi was also an inheritor. But because she had been through the freedom struggle, because she had seen how her family had struggled, she never for a moment, was I would say, going easy. She was relentlessly pursuing.
Yes.
And that is, unfortunately, in a democracy, if you don't do that, you lose touch very quickly.
So how do you see then the future of the Akali Dal now with Mann coming, and if you're saying, like you have said, the kind of disaffection and the anger and the resentment, he's obviously could become a nucleus for a new kind of more radicalized Akali Dal.
Well, that is a very unfortunate thing, but we have seen this happen earlier also. and then it fizzles out. The anger also comes and goes very quickly. Right now, there is anger. Of course, my party has to make amends. We have to have youth on our side. For that, we have to make virtues towards them. We have to find solutions for them to have better avenues. And we are not in power, but at least we should be able to show them, I would say, a game plan, that if we were to come back, what would we do? And I've been saying this in my party, that today people are not only interested in the youth, especially, they are not interested in the Panthic agenda. They want economic freedom. They want to be linked with the national mainstream when it comes to jobs, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to housing. How are you going to provide them with a future? Now, earlier, you would remember, we had done that when we came to power, and we then ruled for 10 years. Our entire focus had moved to economics. And we did deliver a lot. Punjab was a power deficit. We used to have 10 to 12 hours of power cuts every day. When by the time we left, we were power surplus. Our road network was at par with Gujarat. Industry had started coming in. Unfortunately, at that juncture, because of stories which were spread about our leaders' involvements with drugs, etc., which was totally unfounded. But sometimes perceptions are more important than reality, or the Bragadi incident. Yeah. So all these things hurt us. We have to make amends. I do hope that the moderate leadership will be able to make inroads again, because that is the future for Punjab. A totally radicalized political party in Punjab, especially the regional party like Akali, which is more than 100 years old, is not in the interest of Punjab. Yes, we are going to make every effort, and I do hope that we'll be able to capture the imagination of the youth once again.
Right. So just one last question. You made one prediction that in 2024, you see the BJP returning with full strength in the way it's going, and, reading the sort of cards, as it were. But how do you see the opposition in 2024? Do you see it more coalesced in the run up to 2024? Do you see it working better together, or do you see this more scattered and all over the place?
I'm normally an optimist, but unfortunately, in this case, I see very little hope. Because as I said, all these regional parties, they are looking at self-interest. Leaders are more concerned about their own ambition and egos. And so I think they will continue to divide the vote. And as a result, BJP would be the beneficiary.
Okay, just one more question that arises from what you've said. And this is really the last, is about the Congress. You've talked about the regional parties. You've said that the left is regional, which is true. It's just in a state or so. But what about the Congress? Do you think, I think that is a lot hinges around that, because that's the only national party that's left.
You're absolutely right. It was imperative for Congress to survive, if democracy, I would say, for the sake of democracy, because that's the only national party with a pan-India presence. But unfortunately, the way their leadership is dealing with the issues on a day-to-day, I would say the less said, the better, because they're losing touch with reality.
Right. Thank you so much. This was very interesting. Thank you. The recent by-elections threw up some interesting results. One was the defeat of the Samajwadi Party from its strongholds Rampur and Azamgarh in UP. But even more interesting was the victory of Simranjeet Singh Mann from Singrur, where the AAP candidate lost fairly miserably. What does this mean is what has been just explained to us. The opposition seems to be in the doldrums. It's just not being able to get its act together. It does not look like a fighting fit machinery for the forthcoming general elections 2.5 years from now. and the space is being occupied more and more definitively by the BJP. Can something happen? Can the opposition come together? Can the Congress revive to a point where it takes the lead? These are all million-dollar questions for which no one currently has the answers. Thank you.